In the heart of rural Benin, where the red dust clings to every footprint and the trees whisper the names of those who came before, the spirit world is not distant. It walks alongside the living, soft as smoke, real as the earth. For generations, the Agassi family had lived on the same ancestral land. Their compound guarded by the ancient baobab that stood like a silent elder in the center of their yard. Stories of the departed were not just told here, they were lived. Every child knew that the ancestors watched, guided, and sometimes, if forgotten, demanded to be remembered. But nothing in the family's long or. Born on a quiet morning, under a crescent moon. Teo was an unassuming child, gentle, watchful, and unusually silent during his first years. He did not cry loudly. He did not babble endlessly like other children. He simply listened. His silence worried his parents at first, but the village elders whispered that sometimes, when a child enters the world without wailing, it is because he still hears the other side. And then, when he finally spoke at the age of 4, the first name he uttered was Baba Kofi, a name no one had ever mentioned in his presence. A name of a man long buried. A man he had never met. But somehow, Teo knew him. He spoke of things only Baba Kofi could have known. Described places long gone. Told stories that no one alive had told in decades. And when he looked at his grandmother with those deep, ancient eyes and said, "You left his tobacco pipe behind the old altar. He wants it cleaned," she dropped the pot in her hands. What followed was not just a family mystery, it was a spiritual awakening, an unraveling of secrets buried under years of silence and denial. And a journey into the realm where the living and the dead meet in whispers, dreams, and dusty footprints. This is the story of a child who became the voice of an ancestor. And a family that learned to listen again. Teo's birth was not accompanied by the usual chaos of a baby's first breath. There was no wailing. No urgent screams that marked the beginning of most lives. Instead, he entered the world in silence, his small body still, his wide eyes blinking slowly under the pale silver glow of the early dawn. His mother, Adunni, panicked for a moment. But when the midwife checked him, she only nodded solemnly. "He is not dead," she said, placing a protective charm of white cowrie shells near his head. "He is listening." Listening? Adunni was too tired to question it then, but the words clung to her like mist over the morning grass. Teo, the boy who listened. It became the name the elders used in quiet conversations. They watched him, this solemn-faced child with the soft gaze and long silences, as he grew from newborn to toddler. No loud laughter. No babbling. Just long, intense stares at shadows that passed along the walls. Sometimes, he would point at a corner of the compound and murmur unintelligibly. Other times, he would sit beneath the old baobab tree for hours, hands in his lap, eyes closed. His father, Bamadil, worried. He was a man of logic. A schoolteacher in the nearby town who believed in progress and reason. He had grown up with the old stories but had set them aside like clothes too worn to wear. His son's silence frightened him, not just for what it might mean medically, but spiritually. He did not believe in spirits or ancestral visions. Not anymore. "He's just quiet," Bamadil told Adunni. "Some children speak late." But Adunni's mother, Grandma Abike, shook her head when she heard that. Late? Or listening longer than most? "He hears things, that one." By the time Teo was 3, he still had not spoken a full sentence. The village children teased him. Mothers worried he might be cursed or afflicted. But Teo didn't seem to mind. He was calm, unnervingly calm. Like a tiny old man trapped in a child's body. Then came the day that changed everything. It was an ordinary evening. The compound smelled of wood smoke and stew. Adunni was feeding Teo mashed yams while Bamadil marked papers. Grandma Abike sat nearby, humming a hymn from her youth. Teo chewed slowly, staring at the shadows dancing along the kitchen wall. And then, in a clear, quiet voice, he said, "Baba Kofi wants his pipe." The room froze. Adunni blinked. "What did you say, Teo?" He looked up at her, his gaze steady. "You left it behind the altar. He says it should be cleaned. He wants it where it belongs." The yam dropped from her spoon. Grandma Abike stood slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What did you say, child?" Teo turned to her, smiled softly, and said again, "Baba Kofi wants his pipe. The wooden one with the cracked bowl. The one you hid after he died." Adunni's hands trembled. She had never told her son about her grandfather, Kofi Alagba, who had died over 40 years earlier. The man had been a respected hunter, storyteller, and the spiritual head of the family. His wooden pipe had been a constant presence. He would puff it thoughtfully under the baobab tree while telling stories of war, of spirits, of things unseen. After he died, the family had quietly buried him without the full ancestral rites due to political unrest in the region. His pipe had been placed on the altar during the abbreviated ceremony, but then disappeared. Some said it had been stolen. Others believed it had been hidden out of guilt. No one had spoken of it since. Certainly not to a child born decades later. Yet here was Teo, naming the pipe. The altar, the hiding place. From that moment forward, the world around Teo shifted. He was no longer just a quiet boy, he became something else. A vessel. A messenger. A bridge. The village noticed. Neighbors who once looked on him with pity now watched him with wary curiosity. Some came to ask questions. Some came with gifts. Others stayed away, muttering prayers and drawing protective signs in the sand. Bamadil refused to accept it. He must have overheard something. Maybe someone spoke the name in passing. But Adunni knew the truth in her bones. No one had spoken that name in decades. Not even she. Not even in her dreams. Only one explanation remained. Baba Kofi had returned. Night fell quickly in Agassi village, as if the sun had been swallowed by something unseen. Crickets chirped in waves, and the occasional thump of a mortar against wood echoed from distant kitchens. But inside the Agassi compound, there was no sound, only the heavy breathing of 3 generations stunned into silence. Grandma Abike was the first to move. She stood up, her old knees cracking, and walked to the corner of the room where a woven curtain hung loosely over an old doorway, the entrance to the shrine room. It had once been used regularly. A sacred space where libations were poured, and names of ancestors whispered into smoke. But after Baba Kofi's death, it had been closed more often than not. Neglect, modern life, and unspoken guilt had locked it in a slow, respectful decay. Adunni followed, holding Teo close. Bamadil came last, reluctantly. Inside, the room smelled of dry earth and aged palm oil. The walls were dark with the soot of countless candles and incense. In the center stood the ancestral altar, a low, carved stone table draped with faded cloth, cowries, a calabash bowl, and the withered remains of kola nuts long offered. Abike knelt and pulled aside the cloth draped behind the altar. There, in a crevice of the wall behind it, wrapped in brittle brown cloth, was a wooden pipe. She took it out slowly, her hands trembling not from age this time, but from memory. The pipe was unmistakable. Hand-carved, darkened by use. With a hairline crack running down one side of the bowl, the very same pipe Baba Kofi had held in nearly every photo, every memory. And yet, no one had seen it since the night of his burial rites, over 40 years ago. Abike stared at it, tears springing to her eyes. How did he know? She whispered. Teo reached for the pipe, then stopped and simply said, "He is waiting." Adunni took her son into her arms. Bamadil stepped back. "This is not possible," he muttered. "It must be a coincidence." Maybe my mother moved it. Or someone else put it there, years ago. No, Abike said firmly, her voice sharper than it had been in years. I hid it there. The night before the incomplete rites. I couldn't bear to let them burn it or bury it. It was his favorite. Then why didn't you tell anyone? Adani asked softly. Because I was ashamed. Abike replied. We failed him. The rains came early, the fighting reached the border, and we rushed the burial. He was supposed to be honored with a full passage rite, 3 days, 3 nights. Drums. Dances. Offerings. We gave him 1 night. We said we'd finish later. We never did. The old woman pressed the pipe to her heart. And now he remembers. They cleaned the altar. Lit new candles. Laid down fresh white cloth. Adani poured libations from a gourd into the earth, whispering prayers of apology and respect. Abike placed the pipe carefully on a carved wooden stand. The way it had rested when Kofi was alive. Teo stood silently, watching everything with a strange calm. When Abike tried to guide him to the door, he shook his head. No. He wants to speak. The room fell quiet again. Then, in a voice that seemed deeper than it should be, almost layered with something older, Teo said, Why was I forgotten? Abike dropped to her knees. We didn't forget you, Baba, she cried. We were afraid. The world was changing, and we were too weak to resist it. But you were never forgotten. Your name has always lived in our hearts. Teo nodded once, his face serene. Then remember me rightly, he said. Do the rites. Finish what was left undone. My place among the honored dead must be restored. He turned and walked out of the room like nothing had happened. That night, no one slept. Bamadil sat alone in the courtyard, his thoughts shaken. The logic he had clung to his whole life was crumbling. He could not explain how his son had known the pipe was there. Or how the boy could speak with such detail and tone, as if someone else had borrowed his mouth for a few moments. Even the air around the house felt different now, heavier. As if the spirits truly walked among them again. By morning, news had spread. They asked questions. They examined the pipe. They spoke to Abike and Adani. Then they asked to speak with Teo. He answered each elder clearly, politely, with the kind of calm that made even the most skeptical among them shiver. One elder, a diviner named Baba Irako, leaned in close and asked. Do you know who I am? Teo smiled slightly. You were Kofi's childhood friend. You fought together when the raiders came from the north. You broke your leg in the river gorge. The old man's eyes widened. No one alive knew that story but him and Kofi. It is him, Baba Irako whispered. And so the decision was made. The rites would be completed. The forgotten ancestor would be restored. The morning sun rose reluctantly, as if it too was cautious of the ceremony that was about to begin. The Agassi compound was no longer just a home, it had become sacred ground again. Word of the child who spoke for the dead had reached every corner of the village. Some came to witness. Others came out of fear, unsure if what stirred in the boy was truly the spirit of Baba Kofi, or something darker. But for the elders, there was no more doubt. The rites would be done. The silence of 40 years would end. The decision was not just ceremonial, it was spiritual redemption. In the traditions of their ancestors, a spirit denied proper burial rites could become a restless one, a wandering soul trapped between worlds, unable to ascend to the realm of the honored dead. And when such spirits spoke, they did not lie. Especially not through a child. 3 days of purification were required before the ceremony. The shrine room was cleansed with herbs, leaves of bitter kola, scent leaves, and wild basil. Clay markings were drawn on the altar. The women of the family fasted during daylight hours. While the men rebuilt the ceremonial platform at the base of the baobab tree where Baba Kofi used to sit. Teo, though only 4 years old, insisted on participating. He rose at dawn without prompting. He washed his face in sacred water drawn from the village stream, guided not by instruction, but by instinct. Sometimes he would speak aloud words in an old dialect, phrases none of the adults understood fully, but which Abike recognized as Oyo Yoruba, an older form of speech her grandfather had used. The elders began to refer to him differently. No longer Teo, he was now Oyoranloo, the helper. The one who bridges worlds. Even Bamadil, still hesitant in his heart, had stopped trying to rationalize. Each day brought more signs. One morning, Teo wandered into the field behind their home and knelt beside a patch of dry earth. He said only, "This is where his walking stick lies." When they dug there, they found it, blackened by age, but unmistakably carved with the same lion's head motif Baba Kofi had favored. It was buried deep, as if hidden long ago. Abike wept openly. "He is giving us back the pieces," she said, "so we can make him whole again." At sunset, the drums began. Low, steady rhythms that called the spirits to attention. A fire was lit at the base of the baobab, and the air filled with smoke and chants. Elders in white robes circled the fire, throwing crushed herbs and palm oil into the flames. Teo sat in the center, not fearful, but radiant. He wore a small woven sash across his chest and white markings painted in sacred clay on his forehead and shoulders. The lead elder, Baba Irako, stood and raised his staff. "Tonight," he said, "we call back what was denied. We honor the one who watches still. We invite the spirit of Kofi Alagba, son of Alakan, hunter of the forests, keeper of the family's breath, to return and take his rightful place among the honored." The people repeated the names. The drums intensified. And then, Teo stood up. His posture shifted, shoulders straighter, gaze heavier. His small voice took on a deeper cadence. "I am here," he said. "I have waited." A hush swept over the compound. "I do not come in anger. I come in remembrance," Teo continued. "But there is more than my story that needs to be told." He turned to Grandma Abike. "You carry a burden that was never yours." Her face paled. I don't understand," she whispered. "You took something to protect another," Teo said. "Tell them." Abike's lips trembled. The crowd waited. Even the fire seemed to lean closer. "I took the hunter's charm," she confessed, her voice cracking. "The one Baba Kofi wore around his neck. I hid it because it had been promised to someone else." "To whom?" asked Baba Irako gently. "To my brother," she said. "He wanted it to prove he was ready to lead. But he had broken his vows. Kofi refused him. I feared conflict. I hid the charm to stop the feud." There was a moment of silence, then Teo spoke again. "It was not your fault. But the charm must be returned, so I may be complete." The charm, a small, carved bone amulet tied with goat sinew, was recovered from a hidden nook in Abike's room. When placed on the altar next to the pipe and the staff, a gust of wind rushed through the compound though the night was still. The flames flared high, then steadied. Teo closed his eyes and sat down. "He is pleased," he whispered. "But he is not alone." Gasps followed. "What do you mean?" Baba Irako asked. "There are others who wait. Others who were forgotten." Teo turned his gaze toward a man near the back of the crowd, an elder who had not spoken all night. "You buried your brother without his talking drum." The man staggered back, hands to his mouth. "How do you?" "He says the drum is under the fig tree, covered in a leopard skin. Go. Bring it. He waits." By the end of the first night, the ceremony for Baba Kofi had turned into a mass awakening. One by one, the spirits of other forgotten ancestors began to speak, through dreams, visions, even whispers carried by the wind. Teo, sitting quietly beneath the baobab, became the conduit not just for one, but for many. And with each message, each revelation, the people remembered what they had once forgotten. That the dead do not leave. They wait. They watch. And when honored properly, they bless. On the third night, the fire burned hotter than before. The compound had become more than a family home, it was now a sacred ground, a portal. People whispered that the baobab tree, towering and ancient, had begun to hum. Not in sound, but in sensation, as though its bark pulsed with memory and waiting breath. The final rite was to be performed tonight. It would be the rite of passage, gun oku. The crossing over of a once troubled spirit into the realm of the honored dead. It had not been performed in this village for decades. The elders had dusted off old chants from forgotten scrolls. Ritual dancers rehearsed movements passed down orally from ancestor to grandchild. Even the sky seemed to know, clouds parted to reveal a full moon, glowing pale and watchful. And in the center of it all was Teo. At midnight, the people gathered in a circle. The shrine altar had been moved outside, beneath the baobab, where Baba Kofi had spent his final living days. On it rested his pipe, his walking staff, the charm amulet, and now a bowl of sacred kola nuts. The final ingredient. Teo stood at the center of the ring. Dressed in a pure white cloth that shimmered slightly under the firelight. His eyes were calm, but distant, as if part of him was already walking in two worlds. Baba Irako stepped forward. Tonight, he announced, we give our elder his proper journey. No longer shall he walk in shadows. No longer shall his voice come through confusion. Tonight, we guide him home. A hush. Then the sound of drums, soft at first, then faster, louder, insistent. Teo raised his hand. And the drums stopped. He looked into the fire and spoke. Bring me the earth from his grave. Two young men retrieved a small gourd filled with soil from Baba Kofi's original burial mound. Teo poured it in a circle around the altar, murmuring words in that ancient dialect again. Next, he motioned to a bike. She approached, tears already forming in her eyes, and held out a small object, Baba Kofi's last hunting whistle, something only she knew he had. Teo took it, placed it gently on the altar, and whispered. Now he has all that was his. He turned to face the fire. Let him pass. The wind rose suddenly. Leaves swirled upward. And the baobab's branches groaned. Then came the scent, smoke and old tobacco, familiar and comforting. Teo's voice deepened again, layered and solemn. You have remembered me. You have brought back my breath. You have returned my name to the wind. He paused. I go now. The fire blazed high and blue, then lowered into a steady golden glow. The people gasped. Teo took a deep breath and smiled. He is gone, he said. He walks with the others now. And then, for the first time in days, he collapsed. Aduni rushed to him, scooping him into her arms. He was breathing, but exhausted, as if every bone in his body had carried a mountain. His forehead was warm, and his eyes fluttered open just briefly. Mama, he whispered. I'm tired. You rest now, my son, she whispered. You've done enough. Bamadil stood behind her, stunned into stillness. He could no longer deny what had happened. His beliefs had shattered, and yet he felt no fear. Instead, something deep within him stirred. Awe, reverence, and regret. Later that night, he walked alone to the shrine altar, now quiet and still. He knelt before it and whispered into the wind, Forgive me, Baba. I did not believe. But I do now. The next morning, the people found something strange at the base of the baobab. Where the fire had been, a pattern of ashes had formed the shape of a spiral, the ancestral path, an old spiritual symbol said to appear only when a soul has passed successfully to the other side. Baba Irako fell to his knees when he saw it. The door is closed, he said. And peace has returned. Tayo slept for 2 full days. When he awoke, he no longer spoke in voices not his own. He was still calm, still quiet, but the deep knowing in his eyes had softened. He was a child again. But 3 nights later, he came to his mother's bed in the middle of the night. I had a dream. He said softly. What did you see? He was smiling, Tayo replied. Sitting under the baobab. With others. They were laughing. He said thank you. Aduni pulled him close. And he said one more thing. What? He said the world is forgetting too fast. That others are waiting. The Agassi family restored the shrine permanently. Every full moon. They now make offerings, not out of fear, but in respect. Other families across the village began revisiting their forgotten rites. Old altars were dusted. Names long buried were spoken aloud again. Tayo grew into a respected seer, never forced, never formal, but always willing to listen. And every now and then, when the wind shifts beneath the baobab tree, people say you can smell old tobacco and hear faint laughter. The voice of Baba Kofi lives on, not in sorrow, but in peace. Because a child listened. Because a family remembered. Because a spirit was given his way home. Years passed. The baobab tree at the heart of the Agassi compound grew stronger, wider, its roots thick with memory. Children played beneath its shade. Elders sat in circles, sharing stories that had nearly been lost. And at its base, the ancestral altar remained, weathered but sacred. Alive with the soft whisper of incense and the warmth of offerings. Tayo, now 13, no longer spoke with the voice of Baba Kofi. But sometimes, at dusk, he would sit by the shrine alone. Listening. Because he knew. Other voices waited. It began again on a night heavy with rain. Thunder rolled like drums in the belly of the sky, and lightning lit the hills like ancestral fire. Tayo had a dream. He stood at the edge of a great river. On the far bank were shadowy figures. One stepped forward, a woman wrapped in indigo cloth, her eyes lined with pain. You must tell them. She said. I wait beneath the silk cotton tree. I was never mourned. When Tayo woke, the message clung to him like mist. He didn't speak of it immediately, not out of fear. But Rev. H. She. Bab. Tayo nod. I must go. With permission from his parents, who by now understood the weight of his callings, Tayo traveled with 2 elders to Ndebele village. When they arrived, people were wary. No one had approached the silk cotton tree in nearly 30 years. They said it wept blood during the dry season. That crops died when planted near it. But when Tayo walked toward the tree, it stood silent. Still. Watching. He knelt beneath it and placed both hands on the earth. She is here, he said. Buried without name. Hidden in shame. He looked up at the villagers. She was a woman accused falsely. Killed by fear, not justice. Her spirit was never honored. An old woman gasped. My sister, she whispered. She was taken. We were told she had vanished. Tayo nodded gently. She did not vanish. She waited. Over the next week, the people of Ndebele held their first ancestral rite in decades. Guided by Tayo and the knowledge passed down from the Agassi elders, they sang, danced, and wept. The woman was named aloud for the first time in 30 years, Abani. A shrine was built beside the silk cotton tree. The curses lifted. That year, the crops grew tall and strong. News spread again. That the boy who spoke for the ancestors was no longer just a story, he was a bridge. By the time Tayo reached adulthood, he had visited over 12 villages. In each one, he listened. Not as a prophet. Not as a priest. But as a listener, a guardian of memory, a restorer of the forgotten. He began teaching others, not to fear the dead, but to honor them. Not to chase spirits away. But to ask. Why are you here? What was left undone? He taught that the ancestors do not haunt the living, they remind them. They carry truth. And when that truth is honored, peace follows. Some of his students were skeptics at first, people like his own father had once been. But when they saw a blind man guided in dreams to the grave of his unknown grandmother, or a woman healed after returning her ancestor's stolen bracelet, they believed. Because the evidence was not in books. It was in experience. One night, after years of guiding others, Tayo had a final vision. He stood in a great hall carved of stone and smoke. All around him were faces, some familiar, some not. Ancestors. In the center stood Baba Kofi, smiling. You have done well, he said. But you are not the only one. Tayo bowed. Then what should I do now? Teach them, said Baba Kofi. Let the next child listen as you did. Let the next forgotten voice be heard. As the vision faded, Tayo felt not sadness, but completion. Tayo returned to Agassi and built a small school of remembrance beside the baobab. Children came from far and wide, not to learn math or trade, but to learn story, ritual, honor. He taught them to respect the silence. To pay attention to dreams. To never throw away the old names. Because somewhere, in every family, there is an ancestor still waiting. Not with anger. But with longing. And when the wind passed through the branches of the baobab, it carried their voices like song. The story did not end with Tayo. Because in every village, in every shrine, there are still those who wait to be remembered.